Here's battery 1 and battery 2. Let's go! Let's start by seeing what happens when we try to charge them. Battery 1 sits with the red light flashing indefinitely, showing a temperature fault. Interesting. Battery 2 does similar at first, as most Ryobi batteries do, but then shows fully charged. Very odd. The test button does absolutely nothing, not even the flashing single LED low battery indication. It's just completely dead. Not sure how much we're going to be able to do with that one. Guess we better get started. They're held together by 5 Torx-headed screws, all the same length, so no need to keep them separate. You can see I've already removed a few before this. These 2 batteries are part of a lot of 4 I'm hoping to bring back to life. The first thing I can see is a layer of dust and what looked like water residue on the circuit board, combined with the black marks on the main contacts and what looks like burning around the solder joints to the battery test microswitch. I think I'm going to have my work cut out with this one. I can't see any components that look visibly damaged, but there's some odd residue on one of the balancing circuit wires. The switch still works despite the charring around its connectors. We'll give it a clean up with some contact cleaner and also reflow those solder joints. I can't see any other clues from a final look over the circuitry. There's no missing or visibly damaged components, and thankfully no characteristic electrical burning smell. If something's let the magic smoke out, it's often a pain to find out why it happened in the first place. So let's keep going and see what we can find when digging a little deeper. Let's pull out the spring-loaded clips on either side. And with a little wiggle, we've got all the inside stuff out. The 2 MOSFETs look in good shape, no burn marks or other damage, and pulling up the datasheet for these shows that they're quite over spec for this application. I'm going to go out on a whim and assume these are okay for now, unless I find otherwise later. The test button's behaving a bit oddly. When the pack was together it worked okay, showing a single flashing LED, meaning the battery's completely discharged, but now it does nothing. Oh, hang on, one flashing light after a bit of persuasion. Let's make a bit of room and bring in our old friend, the multimeter. You can diagnose an awful lot with even the cheapest of these. I'm going to start by checking over the cell voltages. The cells are wired in pairs, so we'll check each of the 5 pairs and see what's going on. The readings of around 3 volts are low. Not really low enough to cause cell damage, but certainly enough for monitoring circuitry to potentially have a bit of a mood. Let's start by desoldering the balancing connections, or at least I would if the iron was hot enough. These are used by the battery management circuitry to keep all pairs of batteries at the same state of charge. There we go. Much better. Lead-free solder is a bit of a pain to melt on terminals like this. The metal itself soaks away a lot of heat, so I usually melt some good old 60-40 solder into the joint and then use a solder sucker to remove the lot once it's mixed together. It'd be easy to make this part look much better in an edit, but I'll let you witness my suffering firsthand. There's 4 of these connections in total. I'm always careful to tuck any loose wires as high as and far away as I can from other circuitry. I have a healthy respect for lithium-ion batteries after having a couple of them go nuclear over the years. The wires themselves seem in good condition with no damage or corrosion evident. Now we need to disconnect the main battery connections. Again, the large amount of metal present both on the connector track and in the circuit board makes this a bit tricky unless you have a particularly beefy soldering iron. Even set to around 125 watts, the iRoder is struggling a bit here. A brief pause so I can cool down the iron to refill it with gas. Every little helps, as they say. And while I'm waiting, I'll remove the 4 screws holding the circuit board in place. Back at it, and after a bit more fighting we start to see progress. Finally, freedom! Well, apart from the temperature sensor. This is thermally bonded to one of the battery cells with a small adhesive pad which we'll need to reinstall later. Let's start by reflowing those suspicious microswitch joints. A quick dab of 60/40 and they're looking a lot happier. Another quick visual inspection doesn't reveal anything new. With the battery appearing to be completely unchargeable, I was expecting catastrophic failure of at least one component, maybe more. We're going to need to unclip the main power terminal post from the PCB to allow full access for cleaning. There we go, that'll give us enough room to get under there. The switch seems to work reasonably well, but still feels a bit sticky. Let's get our old friend contact cleaner out. Always worth having a can of this in the house. If nothing else, it's great for restoring iffy USB connections. Happy days, the microswitch now seems completely normal and that crisp click is back. IPA solvent is next up. Always ventilate a room when you're using any solvents and keep it away from source of ignition. I've seen how quickly and easily this stuff catches fire. We're going to give the board a liberal coating of IPA, the solvent, not beer, then break out secret weapon number 2, the toothbrush. Soft bristles help lift away residue and other contaminants without damaging the delicate surface mounted components. I wouldn't recommend using it again in your teeth after this though. Let's do this a couple of times, rinsing the circuit board and toothbrush with IPA before, during and after. And finally, we're going to use a can of air duster to remove most of the solvent once we're done. Looking much better. I'd say at least 90% of the residue is now gone. Now for the bit that'll likely ruffle a few feathers. Charging lithium-ion battery cells safely with a bench power supply. As they're wired in parallel pairs, we can theoretically charge with up to 8 amps of current per pair, but doing that when they're at such a low state of charge wouldn't really do them any favours. To give each pair of cells the same baseline charge, we're applying a constant 3.7 volts up to a maximum of 7 amps and waiting for the current to drop to 4.5 amps before moving on to the next pair. This means that each pair of cells will have a similar state of charge. Next, we'll be charging them as one unit, so this is quite important. Normally, the battery monitoring circuitry would take care of this, but as we've removed that from the equation, we'll have to keep a tab on each pair of cells individually. All cells now theoretically charged to the same level, let's set the maximum voltage to 20 with an initial limit of 7 amps and see how we get on. I later went for the full 8 amps of charging current. You can tell these LG cells are excellent quality as they barely broke a sweat and voltages were almost exactly even across all 5 pairs. I think that's enough charge to bring the circuitry online if the cleanup resolved the issue. Let's start getting the battery pack back together. The cutouts for the thick metal strips to slot into need a bit of a cleanup. With that out of the way, we can plonk the circuit board back onto the battery pack, once I lined up the holes correctly, and start reconnecting everything. I'm not going to be shy with the solder on these joints. The Ryobi batteries are capable of powering all sorts of gear from hedge trimmers, jigsaws to inverters, and the last thing I want is one of these getting all hot and bothered because I was being stingy with my 60/40. Let's get those pesky balancing wires back in place next. I'm being careful to make sure they're properly clipped into their little channels too, to avoid them vibrating in use and also to stop them being caught between the two halves of the casing when we put everything back together. I'm not sure what would happen if one of them was to break in service, but I don't want to find out. We'll pop that thermistor back where it came from so it can keep an eye on cell temperatures while the pack is in use or charging. Screws back in place, the button still works, and we've got the low battery LED working correctly on cue. Even though we've given the pack a fair bit of juice, the charge circuitry wasn't connected when we did. I'm guessing it still thinks the pack's almost dead. Back in the housing, making sure everything is seated snugly, and the spring-loaded clips slot back into place after a bit of a struggle, making sure they face the same way as they did when removed. Finally, let's replace the top cover and screw it back on. It's all slotted into place easily, which has to be a good sign. As I mentioned at the start, all 5 screws are the same length, which makes life a little bit easier. Great, the button's still working, but will it charge? Yes, it will! Fantastic. I'll give it a bit of time on the charger and then we'll test it out. 3 lights is more than enough to see if we can put this battery in the success pile. Enter the trusty Ryobi drill and victory! Right, straight onto the second battery. I loosely put this back together in order to test it, completely dead with no light showing at all. There's a lot of evidence of liquid ingress on the PCB, staining and deposits around various components. It's almost like I've seen this before. But thankfully, as before, I can't see anything visibly damaged or missing. Ah well, on we go. Clips and springs off. Pack out of housing. And yup, still dead. Testing the cell pairs is a little more bleak than pack 1. This is absolutely pancake flat and well below the voltage considered bad for the long-term health of a lithium-ion cell. Less than a volt on every cell pair. We'll do the same as last time, remove the circuit board so we can give it a good clean, check for any damaged components, and also see if the cells can be revived with a trusty bench power supply. The 6040 makes another appearance, helping my less than ideal soldering iron get the various joints separated so we can dig in. Nearly forgot about that thermistor. I'm using a piece of paper to keep the main battery connection away from the underside of the circuit board while desoldering. With the balancing wires disconnected, we can pull the PCB away. That staining and residue is pretty obvious, however even with a closer look, thankfully no components seem to be badly corroded or damaged. Enter the ever useful cleaning toothbrush. Where we're going, we don't need protein. A quick clean of the brush and a liberal coating of IPA, again the solvent, not the beer, and we're underway. I'm giving this board 3 cleaning cycles. The residue and deposits are proving quite tricky to shift, but we're slowly getting there. A quick dry. And then away goes the tub until next time. We're going to introduce a small amount of charge into each cell pair, starting at 3.3 volts and limiting it under 3 amps. In the end I'm going to settle on 2.5 amps per pair. And once each cell pair is at 2.5 volts I'm lifting this to 3 amps. And finally 4 amps as we approach the 3.3 volt limit. The limit is soon hit, and the current starts to decay as a result. That's my cue to switch over to the next pair of cells. I'm actually going to start off the next pair at 2 amps instead of 2.5. With the initial voltage being so low, I want to give them the best chance of being successfully revived. Slow and steady is always the way forward with this. All cells now theoretically alive, well and balanced. I'm going to charge them as a unit with a limit of 20 volts and a starting current of just over 2 amps. Off camera I'm gradually increasing the current over time. It took a while for them to reach even a moderate state of charge, but as you can now see they're all reasonably well balanced and seem to be performing really well. Now there's some juice in each pair, I'm charging them individually again to rebalance, at 4 volts until each pair draws less than 3.5 amps. This technique's worked well for me in the past, and it seems to be doing a great job here too. Finally, with the cells balanced for a second time, we're topping up the charge at nearly 20 volts across the pack. And a quick measure shows they're all pretty much at the same level. Excellent. With the pack now holding a decent level of charge and the PCB cleaned up, let's put it all back together and see how we get on. Same story as last time. Lots of solder on those beefy connections. Thermistor securely back in place. And balancing wires reattached. With the circuit board screws reinserted, we can refiddle those clips into position and pop the top cover back on. One of the spring clips is a bit iffy as the plastic around it was previously damaged, but it seems to do the job well enough even so. All 5 torque screws going back into place. It's a minor miracle I haven't lost any. This is going far too well. Surely the run of good luck's got to end soon. We're showing 3 lights on this pack now. That's a good sign. But will it charge? Yes! Fantastic. We'll give it a bit of time on the charger before load testing. And here's the final test. Passed. The drill's working fine. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully these additional batteries will help with a couple of upcoming building projects I'm underway with. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe for more. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.